I've always been a pretty easygoing guy. I like my peace and quiet. I pay my bills on time, and I try to be a good neighbor. So, moving into the Willow Creek Estates a few years ago, I figured I'd fit right in. Man, was I wrong. Willow Creek Estates, on the surface, looks like suburban paradise. Cookie-cutter houses with perfectly manicured lawns, meticulously planned landscaping, and an HOA that takes their job a little too seriously. I bought my house there because it was affordable and close to my work. I figured I could deal with a few rules, right? It started small. A passive-aggressive note on my door about my grass being a quarter of an inch too long. A warning about my trash cans being visible from the street for an hour after pickup. Then, they started nitpicking about the color of my flowers. Apparently, my impatiens were not in keeping with the neighborhood's aesthetic. Seriously? The HOA president, a woman named Dolores, was the ringleader. Dolores lived and breathed Willow Creek Estates. She drove around in a golf cart, armed with a measuring tape and a clipboard, ready to pounce on any infraction. She had this tight, pinched expression and a voice that could curdle milk. I swear, I could feel her judging me every time I walked to my mailbox. I tried to play nice. I mowed my lawn twice a week, planted approved flowers, and even invested in special trash can containers to keep them hidden. But it was never enough. Dolores always found something to complain about. I started to feel like I was living in a prison of perfectly trimmed hedges. The final straw was the tree. I had this beautiful, mature oak tree in my backyard. It provided shade in the summer. Its leaves turned a vibrant red in the fall, and birds loved to nest in its branches. It was the best thing about my property. Dolores decided it was a safety hazard. Apparently, a few acorns had fallen on the sidewalk during a storm, and someone had almost tripped. She demanded I cut it down. I refused. It was a healthy tree, and the acorns were hardly a public menace. I argued with her, pleaded with her, even offered to trim the branches. But Dolores was unyielding. She said the HOA had voted, and the tree had to go. She even sent me a certified letter threatening legal action if I didn't comply. That's when something snapped. I realized that trying to reason with these people was pointless. They were drunk on power and determined to make my life miserable. So, I decided to fight back. But not with lawyers or angry emails. I decided to fight back with landscaping. I started planning Operation Landscaping. First, I researched the HOA bylaws. I found all sorts of loopholes and inconsistencies that Dolores and her cronies had conveniently overlooked. Then, I started documenting everything. Every violation they committed. Every meeting they held without proper notice. Every petty fine they levied without justification. Next, I focused on my property. I knew they were watching me, so I played the game. I meticulously maintained my lawn, planted approved flowers, and even added a few extra shrubs to appease Dolores. But behind the facade, I was preparing for war. Under the cover of darkness, I started digging. I dug trenches, installed irrigation lines, and built retaining walls. I ordered truckloads of topsoil, mulch, and gravel. My neighbors probably thought I was crazy, working on my yard at all hours of the night. They were right, but they didn't know the half of it. My first act of defiance was planting a massive vegetable garden in my front yard. The HOA bylaws specifically stated that vegetable gardens were allowed, as long as they were neat and well maintained. I made sure mine was both. Rows of tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, and zucchini stretched across my lawn, a vibrant display of defiance against the HOA's sterile aesthetic. Dolores nearly had a stroke when she saw it. She sent me a notice demanding I remove the garden immediately, claiming it was unsightly and violated the spirit of the community's standards. I politely declined, citing the HOA bylaws and pointing out that my garden was, in fact, very neat and well maintained. Then, I started on the next phase of my plan, Operation Bird Sanctuary. I erected a series of bird feeders, birdhouses, and bird baths all over my property. I planted native plants that attracted hummingbirds and butterflies. Soon, my yard was teeming with life, a stark contrast to the perfectly manicured, but sterile, lawns of my neighbors. Dolores was furious. She claimed the birds were a nuisance, that they were attracting vermin and making a mess. She sent me another notice, demanding I remove the bird feeders and birdhouses. Again, I politely declined, citing the fact that the HOA bylaws made no mention of restrictions on bird feeders or birdhouses. As the weeks went by, my yard became a haven for wildlife. Squirrels, rabbits, chipmunks, and all sorts of birds flocked to my property. It was a beautiful sight, but it was also a carefully calculated strategy. I knew that Dolores and her HOA cronies hated anything that disrupted their perfect little world. And I was happy to provide the disruption. But my pièce de résistance was the rock garden. The bylaws stated you can have natural-looking rock and water features. On the surface this seems innocent, but my rock garden was no ordinary rock garden. I spent weeks collecting large boulders from nearby quarries, arranging them in a seemingly haphazard, but actually very deliberate, pattern. Interspersed among the rocks were cascading waterfalls, meandering streams, and lush vegetation. I even added a small pond stocked with goldfish and water lilies. It was a masterpiece of natural beauty, a vibrant ecosystem thriving in the middle of suburban sprawl. Dolores went ballistic. She claimed the rock garden was a hazard, that it was attracting mosquitoes, and that it was simply too wild for Willow Creek Estates. She threatened to fine me, to sue me, to do whatever it took to make me remove it. That's when I dropped the hammer. I sent a certified letter to Dolores and the rest of the HOA board, outlining all of their violations of the bylaws, all of their illegal meetings, and all of their unjustified fines. I included copies of all the documentation I had collected, along with a detailed legal analysis of their actions. I also included a demand that they immediately cease and desist from harassing me, that they repeal all of the illegal fines they had levied, and that they agree to a public apology for their behavior. If they refused, I threatened to file a lawsuit against the HOA, seeking damages for harassment, emotional distress, and violation of my property rights. The letter was a bombshell. Dolores and her cronies were stunned. They had never expected anyone to fight back, let alone to expose their incompetence and corruption. Within days, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. They voted to remove Dolores as president and to repeal all of the illegal fines. They even issued a public apology for their behavior, which was published in the community newsletter. The new HOA president, a kindly old man named Mr. Henderson, contacted me personally to apologize for the previous board's actions. He assured me that they would be more reasonable and fair in the future. I accepted his apology, but I also made it clear that I would continue to hold them accountable. I had proven that even a single homeowner could stand up to a tyrannical HOA and win. As for my yard, it remains a vibrant oasis of nature in the middle of Willow Creek Estates. My neighbors still give me strange looks, but they also secretly admire my audacity. And Dolores? She moved out of the neighborhood shortly after the scandal. I heard she moved to a gated community with even stricter rules. I guess some people just can't be happy unless they're making someone else miserable. I learned a valuable lesson from this experience. Don't mess with a man and his landscaping. And always read the fine print. You never know what loopholes you might find.